We, the humans, are often coined as unique and social animals that are different from other species because of the way we perceive things and react to it. We might be ahead of everyone else on this planet when it comes to the intellectual level, but where do we stand when it gets down to feeling compassionate towards others? Many might cite examples of dogs or say dolphins who feel as heavily as any emotional human being. This story of a little girl leaves us with serious questions to ask when she takes a stand in the courtroom after being wronged by a man, and what this dog named Carl did for her left everyone gazing in awe. Adults tend to perceive things in a different way than a child would, and even a grown-up can struggle against the things that may come across in a courtroom while testifying against a person who had done them wrong. So you can only imagine how unwanted and frightening the feeling of stepping into a courtroom to testify could be for a child. She had to do it on her own as her parents wouldn't step with her into the stand, which made the little girl feeling alone and scared. But she had a special someone she could ask to join her in the stand. But justice needs to be served, and it was on that day when this little yet brave girl stepped into the stand. She had to do so to testify against the man who had allegedly done her wrong. The little girl was in distress as the glimpses of what happened to her flashed in front of her eyes the moment she saw him. She was petrified and almost froze, but soon after she spotted her friend Carl and did something that changed her life for good. Children are as innocent and sensitive, but when the situation demands, they can often be the most courageous person standing in the room. Don't ever make the mistake of misinterpreting their innocence for their weakness, as they are much stronger than they look. They are able to bounce back from absolutely anything, and that's what this little girl did. She was initially hesitant as she hadn't expected herself to end up in such a tough situation. She was a kid after all, and she could use some support by her side. Carl was a lot more than an ordinary pet dog. This 65-pound boxer was assigned to protect and serve a special purpose, but don't think that he was a police dog. He was a part of the K-9th Circuit program, which was developed to support children in the courtroom who were victims of any sort of abuse. These cute dogs stepped in to rescue the kids when they were vulnerable in the stand. But Carl was something special, as he was born with something that gave him an edge over the others. What was it that made this dog extra special? For this little girl who had to take the stand in the courtroom, Carl was nothing short of an angel in disguise. Animals have a blessing from nature which makes them able to sense things, and dogs among all these animals are possibly the most superior when it comes to bringing it in use. Carl could tell or sense that the little girl was going through tough times. Dogs are compassionate, which is a trait of their character, and their sixth sense made things much easier for the children in the courtroom. But Carl was a league above than any other dog, and it would be of immense help to this little girl. A dog is a man's best friend indeed. They are sweet, sensible, loving, and pretty much everything that makes them so special. They always bounce back without dwelling in the past. They might have been manhandled before and mistreated in other ways in the past, but they would still keep on going without holding a grudge against the world. Carl had a disability, but it didn't act as a hurdle, but rather allowed Carl to lead and live an awesome life in making others' life better. Carl was different than other canines of his squad. He was deaf from his birth, but you won't believe that this disability would help him through the course of his life. How come? The other dogs with proper hearing ability need the training to avoid the different sounds in a courtroom, such as the sound of gavel, people's sobs, and the usual buzz inside a courtroom that can disturb a dog, whereas Carl would never react to such sounds as he was deaf. Carl is a dog, but he was also very much like a furry teddy bear, and kids adore him. He was simply too funny and friendly to ignore, which helped them handle this particular situation. This dog was able to help the little girl out, and she badly needed him. But his hearing impairment was no walk in the park either. Kids were quite comfortable with Carl as he was composed and laid back. This was because of his inability to hear. The dog was friendly enough to make the kids comfortable, but he was also big enough in size to make them feel secure. He used to wear a blue cap to the courtroom every day, which was kind of his uniform. It gave him with a goofy and cute look that made him look more friendly and allowed the children to put themselves to ease. However, the dog's hearing disability would soon pose one particular problem. However, training a deaf dog is harder than usual as they need specific instructions. Since they can't hear, it becomes crucial to keep a constant eye contact, which is not as easy as it may sound. This disability may often pose a problem. How would you train an enthusiastic puppy who's unable to hear you? When they jump around like crazy, you can't just get control of them by simply yelling, "Heel." You would have to find a different way to be the center of their attention, which isn't a walk in the park. The process of becoming a K-9th Circuit dog wasn't as easy for Carl either. He was going through the same difficulties as his trainer. Due to his inability to hear, Carl had to make eye contact his first and only priority so as to understand and learn the commands, which were hard for both Carl and his trainer. But the dog turned out to be the most phenomenal four-legged buddy they had ever crossed paths with, and Carl took everyone by surprise with the potential he had. However, Carl was a smart dog and he very well understood all the signs, which made it easy to communicate the dog. Carl was trained to use and understand American Sign Language. The grasping power and his ability to learn things real quick amazed the trainers. Now able to understand his trainer, he was now making a drastic improvement. It will be right to say that he was the best candidate in his group. But this new trick further gave birth to a new problem. So what now? Carl was now able to understand what his trainer wanted to convey, and he could easily differentiate and immediately respond to it. The dog was simply one of his kind. He was as smart as it gets, but no one is a born perfectionist. Practice makes a man perfect, or here a dog for this matter. He had to fail multiple times before reaching to perfection. But the good thing was he never gave up, irrespective of the different obstacles that came his way. It was obvious that Carl relied on signs instead of voice commands to receive the instructions given to him. However, the problems arose in situations when Carl had to interact with the children. The little ones didn't know the hand signs used to control Carl and convey their words to him. Everything else was good, but this barrier to communication that stood between children and Carl was something that needed to be addressed. Incredibly, Carl's trainer had found a way to overcome this problem. Carl's trainer combined a series of easy-to-use and learn hand signals that would make it much easier for the kids to communicate with the deaf dog. And that's what happened, as the kids easily picked up this method and they were now able to get through Carl. No one else except the kids and Carl himself could understand the unique language in the courtroom. As a result, Carl became an essential element in such cases and brought relief to as many kids who were involved in the trial. The problem with using sign language is that most kids do not know it. As a matter of fact, most adults don't have a clue about it either. So it was obvious that the children needed to learn the language beforehand to interact with Carl. It struck as a genuine issue, as the kids were already going through a lot of trouble and it wouldn't be nice to ask them to bother themselves in learning something they didn't have a clue about. But where there is a will, there's a way. And the trainers had found an interesting way to make things much better. A kid won't say no to playing unless he is thinking of other game to play. What I mean to say is that they love playing all the time and they wouldn't mind giving absolutely anything a shot if you tell them it's a game. That right there is a new way to teach them math. Carl's disability also allowed the kids to communicate with him in a way that any other adults in the courtroom would find it hard to understand unless they happen to know the sign language, which I bet most of the people don't know. So, what went down between Carl and the children was their secret, and this fact would prove to be helpful in the case of this little girl. Perhaps it was too much for a girl of her age to handle, as she started to beat out loud the moment she stepped into the stand. She had never experienced anything as such before and she was scared to her bones. But fortunately enough, she had someone by her side who would help the girl calm her nerves down. Carl was there in her sight during the whole trial, and he would soon do something that would ease things up for this little girl. This little girl was impressed and overwhelmed by Carl's ability to communicate through signs. She had to undergo a difficult case and she had even more difficult things to do. She had lost her faith in this world because of what a man had done to her in the past, and now she had to take the stand against this very man in the courtroom to testify and put him behind the bars. But she was not alone in this. Her friend Carl was there to help her, and he soon did something special for her. A sign had changed this little girl's life for the good. The little girl was finally ready, as her court day had now arrived. The kid was overwhelmed by the sight, as it was the first time she had entered a courtroom and she had no idea about what to expect. The worst thing happened to her as soon as she stepped into the stand. The girl was petrified after meeting eyes with the man she had to testify against. But soon after she remembered what she had been told to do in such a moment. She looked at Carl and gave him a sign that would change the girl's life forever. What was this sign and how did it change things in a moment? It was a sign that asked Carl to come next to her side and sit close to her. Carl immediately stood up and did as asked. The dog's presence calmed down the girl and she had an emotional switch. She was no longer scared or terrified and felt safe and secured sitting behind Carl's muscles. Carl's support was what it took, and the girl began to testify. She regained her composure in no time, and what she had practiced for this big day came back to her. She continued her statement without a speck of nervousness in her voice, and after she was done it was time to wait for the decision. Thanks to Carl that the girl successfully testified, which helped in putting the man behind the bars. He would never hurt the girl again, and one deaf dog made it possible. What the little girl lacked at that time was confidence, as it was hard for her to be assertive in front of the man who had done her wrong. She needed support that could boost her confidence, and Carl was everything the girl needed to be embodied in a dog. She is now free from all the trouble, and Carl's story took the city by storm in no amount of time. I have never been to a courtroom, but from what I have heard from people and after observing their experiences closely, I can tell you one thing for sure, that this little girl was more courageous than most of the grown-ups out there. With her testimony, she made it possible to put an evil man behind the bar, given that she was the victim of his wrongdoings. The little is saved now, and the bad man would never hurt her again or any other kids because of the sheer display of bravery and courage this little girl displayed on the day of trial. It was also evident that Carl had a significant role to play, and she would remember this four-legged friend of her for a lifetime. A kid tends to take more time to recover from a past traumatic incident than an adult would. Having said that, it is also the responsibility of the society to safeguard and protect the emotions and sentiments of these offspring, but there are certain evil elements in the society that still prevail. Unfortunately, when these children become victims of such elements, unprecedented heroes like Carl have to step in to protect them in the courtroom. The influence they have on these kids is even more than that of a bodyguard, as they give these kids with a sense of emotional as well as physical strength. Millions of people came to know about Carl's story from different posts spread all over the social media and the real coverage on news channels. Carl did a great job in influencing the society, as K-9th Circuit program was widely appreciated. Joanna, Carl's trainer, was the happiest person around because of the exposure Carl had been getting. More people were now aware of the fact that the children had someone to look at if they find it hard on the witness stand. Children would rather trust a known person, especially when they have been wronged by a stranger, and a dog is the symbol of unconditional love, loyalty, and a true friend. In a nutshell, someone these kids can rely upon without having to think twice. Carl was there beside this girl, and everything went well inside the courtroom, and the girl gave her testimony, but was the friendship she had with Carl over after that? We'll be there as long as the child wants Carl to stay in their life. He's helped a lot of children, trainer Joanne shared in a recent interview. Carl's support to a child is not just limited to a courtroom, and he simply doesn't vanish from their lives after a trial. Prearranged meetings with Carl are scheduled time to time instead of just leaving the kids alone after the traumatic experience they have had in their lives. They also need special care and love to help them deal with the aftermath of the trial, and who better to rely on other than the one who helped these kids in the courtroom. Carl is an unsung hero, but regardless of it, he carries on to serve those little kids as well as protect them in the courtroom. He is an essential part of the process that serves justice to the little victims who have been wronged. Kids are sensitive beings, and wrongdoing can certainly leave them in a trauma. They need a sense of protection, both emotional as well as physical, and no one does it better than a cute dog. We thanks Carl, even if he would never realize the responsibility he carries on his shoulder and how important he is to those little kids. Carl was not a superhero with a long cape, but he was simply a real-life hero who wore a blue cap to work. There are many super dogs like Carl who are active under the K-9th Circuit program. These real-life superheroes are absolutely unaware of how they are able to help so many kids who have been victims of abuse in the past. A trial becomes even more difficult to progress when there are kids involved, and dogs like Carl make things much easier for the little kids. Carl was a friend to the little girl, and the end of the trial didn't affect their friendship much. It didn't stop the little girl from seeing Carl outside the courtroom. Her family would often contact the trainer to schedule meetings with Carl, as the dog was often busy serving in the court. The girl would carry Carl's favorite dog food along with her to feed him. They would play together until they were exhausted, and Carl made sure to lick her face clean. There are many kids out there who suffer through the hands of evil elements that still prevail in the society, but thanks to the many heroes in the likes of Carl who are a ray of light to these kids in the times of darkness. Carl has helped almost as much as a dozen kids till date. Not only he helped them in getting justice, but also in ways that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. He was the pillar of strength for these kids, as he supported them emotionally and also giving them a sense of security at the same time. We would never want a kid to be a victim of an evil act, but if they, unfortunately, do end up in such circumstances, there will always be a Carl to help them. It was Judge Turner who first saw the need for such a program and later developed it on his own. As we know, the program served as a solution to the children who were required to testify or undergo forensic interviews, as it provided them with a sense of security and made them feel comfortable. But the program is not only limited to kids who are in need, as it is quite extensive. Kids are emotionally sensitive beings, and they need such program to support them, but they aren't the only one in need, and Judge Turner made sure to address this issue as well. An adult can also call for the dog service under certain circumstances. Victims including violent offenses or an adult who is emotionally or mentally challenged can avail the service. In some cases where the court thinks there's a need for a more therapeutic approach, the K-9th Circuit program is adopted as well. One can simply visit the webpage and get access to the K-9th referral form electronically. The dog teams enlisted under the program are often found in the juvenile court's lobby, aiding the children and the families to calm down. The team consists of a dog and its handler and is often asked to appear at the proceedings with the child or the concerned adult. The teams are always with the individuals when they are waiting outside the courtroom for their hearing, changing their mood by replacing tensed expressions with joy and smiles. As per the studies conducted in this subject, it was found that people tend to recollect facts much better and provide with precise information while recalling traumatic incidents when they feel safe and relaxed. With the dog teams to assist these kids and adults, they are more relaxed while recalling a past traumatic incident, which helps them in providing with a more accurate testimony during the trial. With clearer details, the court's decision is more effective and fast.